Everybody, let's talk about using your spell through the API. Now, this is a manual spell, and while the manual part of manual spells might make it seem like they're not meant for the API, the true difference is whether you define your start steps variables yourself or whether the trigger integration does. So you use manual spells through the API. And you can see here, if you go to the API tab, we have sample snippets that you can just copy paste. We have samples for JavaScript, Python, and just straight bash. And you can just copy paste this code. It has your API key and the spell ID already in there. And that's pretty much it. In this spell, we have two inputs, company's name and a website. So let me go back to JavaScript since I think most developers are using our API or using JavaScript. We pass in a JSON body here, which is we have the inputs as an object inside of that, and that's the company name and the company website. So you just add in the variables here, and then the spell will be kicked off, and when it's done, it'll return the outputs in the same way, just a JSON object with the outputs. Now, you might ask, okay, how do I work with files? Well, all you need to do is convert them to base64 string and then pass them along. We don't do any of the form data or other tricky ways to upload files. Once you convert them to base64 and send them in, then it's going to work exactly the same. Now, there's two modes that you can use for the API. You can either wait for it to finish, so for short running spells, or if you have infrastructure that is set up to pretty much always be online, that's totally fine. But what happens if you have a spell that takes minutes, hours, sometimes even days, especially if it has a review or a wait step? Then what you can do is you can click this toggle here, and when you kick off the spell, you're going to see that you get a run ID back as JSON. So we're going to give you the spell run ID, and you can pull that for a response whenever you'd like. So the output's going to look like this. If it's not done yet, it'll be like state, I believe, pending, and then there's not going to be any outputs. But if it's finished, it's going to look like the state success, and you get the outputs right here. And so you can call that wherever you want. And if your system goes down or if your spell takes forever to run, which definitely some do, then you can set up some polling infrastructure to do that yourself. Now, what do I do if I want to update my spell? I might have some inputs that I am expecting to pass in to the spell, and then some outputs that I'm expecting to come out. And I use that in my code. So if I update my spell and I change either of those things, then that contract, that expectation is broken. Well, there's a couple things we always recommend for using your spells in the API. First, we always recommend that you safely handle spell API calls in your code, just in case of any interruption. It could be that you update your spell, or it could be that a service goes down that we have no control over, like OpenAI sometimes. And then you have to make sure that if there are errors returned, that your code can gracefully handle it. That's just basic programming. The other part is if you don't modify the start step or the display step outputs, then there aren't going to be any issues when you update it. It'll use that same contract and it'll just carry over. And if you do modify either the start step or the display outputs, then what we recommend if you need a clean transition is to duplicate the spell. So if I duplicated this one right here, I can just go up right there. Then I'll get a completely new spell. I can make those modifications, change the start step, change the outputs, and then I can use that new spell ID in my code so that when I deploy my code, then it's going to carry over cleanly, and there's not going to be any risk of interruption. You can find our API documentation in the link in the description, and then any questions you have, share them our way in the Slack community or in the in-app chat, any of the ways you want to reach out to us, and we'll respond pretty quickly. I'll see you next video.